Hey guys, it's Rachel. Yeah, I didn't film this video when I wanted to film it at all. My goal was to do like a wrap up every couple months, which I did for the first like 4 months of having this channel, but then, life. I started my master's program. I'm getting a master's in English, and then my landlord discovered my cat and basically told me that I could either pay $3,500 or leave or kick the cat out. So I chose to leave and I became a girl boss and bought my own home. So basically, I've not been reading a ton lately. I have read some things though since I last updated, so I do want to do a wrap up today. I will say that there are two books that I read that I'm not going to be talking about in this video because they already have their own individual videos. So one of them is just a poetry anthology. It was real chonky. I talk about that in a video. And then I also read Stephen King's The Shining, which I loved, and I have a whole reading vlog about that. So if either of those things interest you, I will have the links down below. So let's talk about all the books I read since February, which is not that many, but we're going to talk about them. And I read most of them on my Kindle. Last time was a lot of physical books. Last wrap up, it was a lot of books that I really, really enjoyed. This time I had a lot of books with some mixed feelings about them. But the first one I want to talk about, I want to talk about this very quickly because I do have a bias with this one. It's Of Us and Them by T.L. Coughlin. And the reason why I have kind of a bias is I kind of know the author. We're in the same writing group, which she thanks in her acknowledgments. And to be fair, I am definitely more of a lurker in this group, but still, I like her, so already kind of biased. But Of Us and Them is really cool and different, I will say that. It's not a book that I necessarily thought that I would like, because it's a science fiction fantasy mashup, and I wasn't sure how well it would be done because it's about this girl named Everin, and she's basically going to be a vessel for these leviathans, and the leviathans are basically dragons, and the dragons are supposed to help humanity get their crap together because in this world, dragons have helped humans throughout different ages when they needed them. And if things are going wrong, it takes her forever to mature into being a proper vessel, and then there's like a murder mystery thing happening with the other kids that are vessels for the leviathans. And so it's in the future, so that's where the science fiction element comes in. And one thing that I didn't think would go as well as it did, because it went super well, was the world building, blending that futuristic science fiction setting with this ancient lore of the leviathans. And so you see that in like even kind of the architecture of where they're at and stuff like that. So that I thought was really well done. I think that the world building was this author's strongest point by far. I will say it took me a little bit longer to really vibe with the characters, but I did get there. I will say, you know, this is a book where it didn't start off super into it, but once I was hooked, I was hooked. There's also a ton of fabulous biracial representation. Everyone in this book is inexplicitly biracial, which is lovely. And I believe that the authors talked about this on social media before, where she was talking about how she didn't want there to be some sort of explanation because she's biracial herself. And so everyone's just biracial. So good diversity rep in there as well. So if you are looking for kind of an up-and-coming author, she, I think, is a good one to try out. I'm excited for the sequel. There's going to be a sequel to Of Us and Them in the future. I'm definitely going to read it. I thought it was a fun time. The next one I read was a kind of classic, and I've never read anything by this author before, Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. And I really did not think I would have waited this long to try Anne Rice before. Like, I mean, literally she passed away, and I know that she's an author that meant a lot to so many different people, and I think that was kind of my wake-up call, like, holy crap, I literally waited until this woman is dead before I read her work. And so I figured Interview with the Vampire would be a good place to start. A lot of people say to start with the Vampire Chronicles, so that's what I did. And so this is a pretty, well-known and beloved story. So you have this vampire who is interviewing with a human about his life story, and you get to hear about, you know, how he became a vampire and how he and this other vampire transformed a child into a vampire and the complications that whole thing kind of brought up. I did not love this, I'm not going to lie, but I can understand reading it why other people would love it. I can understand why Anne Rice is so beloved, because one thing that she is amazing at is creating an atmosphere. Like, I really felt that kind of dark nighttime, old school, like 1700s Louisiana vibe. Like, you feel the atmosphere. It feels very brooding and atmospheric, and I loved that about the story. I think that the biggest thing for me with this book is I just had a hard time staying engaged. You get a lot of beautiful descriptions, and you get a lot of like philosophical thoughts from our vampire, but what is his name? Louis? I should remember this. It hasn't been that long since I've read it, but like, well, I guess it has. Whatever. I just had a hard time staying engaged. That was kind of my biggest thing. Like, I got kind of bored a lot of the time. I will say that, and this is a me problem, and this is probably one of those things where I say this and it's like, girl, why did you even pick up this book? I don't always like interview style narratives, or when it's just, you know, one person like, this is my life story, sit and listen to it, because it tends to pull me out of the story, because what they're telling is the main story, but then you have reminders that that's not what you're in right now. And so it would kind of come back to the present, and you would get some commentary on, you know, Louis speaking with his interviewer. I can't remember if the human even has a name. And it just, I don't know, that pulled me out a little bit. It was kind of hard for me to understand the characters and their motivations, especially once we hit like the last 25%. All of a sudden, you got characters that are into each other, and I was like, where did this come from? But I will say, I mean, it gets kind of gay, so I kind of wonder if because of the time that it was written in, that Anne Rice kind of felt like, maybe at the time she felt like she needed to just throw the gayness at the end, because maybe it wouldn't have been published because people were so homophobic at the time. Maybe that's why it felt like such a surprise to me. I'm not really sure. But yeah, it just felt a little bit random towards the end. Some of the decision making, I was kind of like, wait, why are we doing this? But yeah, beautiful writing, gorgeous atmosphere. I just had a hard time caring a ton about what was going on. So I don't think I'm going to continue with this series. I gave this a 3 out of 5 on Goodreads. The next one I read was some nonfiction, Burnout, The Secret of Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. This was fine. It focused specifically on female stress, or stress commonly shared by women. Stressors, I should say, commonly shared by women. I don't know how obvious that is from the title of the book, so please be aware of that. So like, if you're a dude, maybe don't read this, or, you know, whatever. I don't know if the marketing team thought that we'd be able to infer that this was targeted to women based off of the pinkness of the book. I don't know, which is silly because not all women like pink anyway, and it's totally okay to be a guy and like pink and not relate to female related stressors, whatever. Anyway, so it was fine. I will say I just didn't get a ton out of this. There are some interesting subtopics explored. So, I mean, they talk about this idea of the stress cycle. That was really interesting. They talk about the Bikini Industrial Complex. That's something that I feel like I should be reading more about just in itself. I guess my biggest problem overall was, first of all, it shouldn't be called burnout. If you are already burnt out and you're reading this book, it's not going to help you. If you're already burnt out, Laziness Does Not Exist by Devin Price is probably going to be a lot more useful for you. Burnout is more about how to manage daily stress so that maybe you could eventually avoid burnout. But I feel like if you're picking up this book, you're already burnt out and it's not going to help. So there's that. It just didn't, I feel like I didn't get a ton out of it. And I guess that's all there really is to say. It's not a bad book. I just didn't, I don't even remember a whole lot of it because I didn't take away very much from it. So I give that one a 3 out of 5. So the next one I read in physical format, Real Phonies and Genuine Fakes by Nikki Beer. So Nikki Beer is a poet that I've been following for a little while because my professor, one of my professors from my university, they're friends, and so I got to see her read some of her poems on my university campus, and I bought her book, The Diminishing House. The Diminishing House is one of my favorite poetry collections ever. I think it is absolutely beautiful. And so when she came out with Real Phonies and Genuine Fakes at the beginning of this year, I knew I had to buy it. And so it's an interesting set of concepts that to kind of tie this together. It's all about illusion. It's about lies. It's about exploring the truth through lies and, what it all means. Did I necessarily vibe with every single poem in this collection? No. However, every single poem was good. Like, I felt like everything had something unique going for it, some really cool turns of phrases. So yeah, not every single poem vibed with me, but I would consider this a high quality collection. I give Real Phonies and Genuine Fakes 4 to 5 stars on Goodreads. And last but not least, I read one of the most hyped books of all time. Finally, I really didn't think... There are so many books that are out right now that are really popular, like on BookTube and on BookTok and whatever, that like, I'm sure that they're technically very good. I just don't think that they're necessarily for me. That's one thing I think I'm pretty good at as a reader, is like, I don't really read things just because they're popular, because I know that I won't like it just because it's popular. Like, it has to speak to me, like the synopsis has to do something for me. And so this one is one that I didn't think would do much for me initially, and that's Circe by Madeline Miller. I've never read this book before. I've never read anything by Madeline Miller. This is my first time reading anything by her. I went out of my way to get the British edition. I mean, look at how beautiful she is. And then there is a map of Aiaia, however you say it. And then, look what it looks like naked. It's so pretty. So yeah, I went out of my way to get this beautiful edition because frankly, the US edition looks like a friggin' textbook and I didn't want to read it. Also, the spine is pretty impressive. I think the turning point that made me realize that I should probably try to read this is I never realized that Circe was a witch. And I heard that there were different themes of like isolation and individuality and stuff like that. And all of that sounded like it would speak to me. So eventually I did try this out because I learned more about what the story is about. Because a lot of times people are like, it's about mythology. And I'm like, that doesn't tell me a whole lot. Because unless you're super into mythology, hearing someone say, it's about mythology isn't really going to do anything for you. And so that didn't do anything for me. So once I learned that she's a witch and about the different themes, I was like, okay, let's try it. So it's about Circe. Circe is put into exile by her family. Her father is Helios, the sun god. And she's able to do this witchcraft. It causes drama. She has to live in this island by herself. And that's nice in a lot of ways because she can hone her witchcraft and she can kind of do her own thing and she doesn't have all these friggin' people bothering her. But obviously after a while, you kind of want something more. And so she ends up bonding with a lot of humans. I do have a student this year who got super into reading in my class and decided that she learned along the way that mythology is her thing and she really loved this book. And so I wanted to make sure I finished it before the school year ended so I could talk to her about it. I will say that right away I thought that Circe was a compelling character. I liked reading about her. I felt like I could vibe with her. Towards the middle is where I started to really lose interest. The plot felt very episodic, and I just don't really like that in general, which that's very typical of myths, and that's why I don't always care for mythology. It's very episodic plots. It's like this happens, and this happens, and then this happens. I like a plot that feels like I'm headed somewhere, and like I know where I'm headed. And that's not really what I got with in this. It felt more pantsed than plotted, I guess. But even despite all of that, I thought that the writing was super gorgeous no matter where I was in the story. So I kind of felt like this was going to be another 3 out of 5 for me. But then we got to the ending. And, since it is mythology, since the plot has been very episodic, we see Circe lose a lot of people. We see that she gets so connected to humanity and humans just don't last. I didn't expect a very happy ending. I don't really know what I expected out of the ending, but then the ending hit me and I was so happy that I was literally in tears. So I went from being like, okay, Circe's a pretty compelling character, halfway through, never mind, I don't think I really like this book, I'm not super engaged, whatever. And then at the end, like, oh my god, I'm crying. Like, it was so good. It ended so beautifully. And I think that now that I kind of understand where this was all going, I think that the story is even more beautiful for me, because it was going somewhere. It feels very episodic, but it's going somewhere the whole time. In the end, I gave this a 4.5 out of 5. For me, it's not the full 5 out of 5 because like I said, it was kind of hard for me to care the whole time. I feel like on a reread though, this might be one that I reread and enjoy better the second time than the first time. So that was probably the highlight of this span of time where I was reading that. And of course, The Shining, like I said, I got a different video down below on that book. So those are all of the books that I read, except I did get to mark a very special book as read on Goodreads. My book, The Poet's Tarot. And I know that sounds silly, but like, I've thought about this a lot, because sometimes I'm not reading very much because I'm writing so much, and when you're writing, you're rereading your own work over and over again, but you can never mark that on Goodreads. It never counts as anything. So I didn't like rate myself or anything, but I marked my book as read, so that's cool. It is so if you don't know, if you didn't check out my other video, I'm going to put my video about how I self-publish down below. This poetry collection is about tarot. So I have one poem for each card of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So you don't need to be familiar with tarot to read this book and enjoy it. If you are familiar with tarot, it's cool too. It just kind of, I think it could appeal to a lot of people. So if you're interested, it's on Amazon, and the link is in the link tree. Okay. So hopefully this is my goal for the summer now, because originally this summer was going to be the summer of writing. It was going to be the summer of catching up on doing some revisions, and then also creating one new manuscript that I barely got started on last summer. It's now the summer of moving, because I need to move all of my stuff to a temporary place. I have to move back in with my mother temporarily while I'm fixing up the house that I bought, because it is a fixer-upper. I know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing, but my best friend knows what he's doing and he's helping me, so it's fine. And it's mostly just painting. Like, how hard is that? So that's going to be a whole process. Plus, I'm going to Cape Town, South Africa for a few weeks in the middle of everything. So I don't know how much I'm going to read. Because plus on top of this, I have the master's degree that I'm working on. So I have no idea how much reading for fun is actually going to take place. But, we'll see. I also don't know how much uploading will happen. But I'm going to do my best. All right. So hopefully y'all have been reading some good books. Let me know what you're reading down below. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.